Salutaters, my potats, it is I, Rave, and I am back with another episode of Read with Rave, a series in which I read books or short stories written by myself or by some of my friends. A couple of small disclaimers. Disclaimer number 1, I have already gotten permission from my friends to read their books or short stories so as to avoid copyright. That being said, I will have links to their social media down in the description below. Disclaimer number 2, these books and short stories are not meant for children. The average audience is teens or young adults, so if you are a young child, please jump off this video and return when I have gaming or art videos. Today, I will be reading The Crossroads Planet, Book 1 of the Crossroads series by Robert Field. Chapter 6. Lance, can you hear me? Lance's head nodded. Lance, you've got to relax your grip on that filament. The filaments are short-circuiting somehow. I'll try, he said through clenched teeth. Soon the filament he was pinching relaxed a little. Lance, I don't think we should let go all at once. I'll have you know that we're floating in midair, and I'm not sure we're over the bed anymore. She relaxed her pinch a little as well, and their rotation slowed to a stop, gradually starting up in the opposite direction. That's good, Lance, a little more. Little by little, they were unwound and lowered to the floor, becoming wedged in the tight space between the bed and the wall. The filaments disappeared from normal sight, and when she used her spirit sight, the two filaments had resumed their original paths, linking the hearts of Lance and Crystal. For a while, neither spoke. Then Lance spoke up. Does thee mind if we try to get up? I mean, it's all very nice and cozy, but... And he grasped the side of the bed firmly and worked them both into a state of greater uprightness, in which Crystal was firmly planted in Lance's lap. This time it was Crystal's turn. Grabbing Lance's shoulders firmly, she rose unsteadily to her feet and abruptly sat down on the bed, while Lance finished extricating himself. He sat down beside her. After a few deep breaths, he turned to her. Thee knows what this means, doesn't thee? Crystal nodded. I'm beginning to get the idea. Thee facilitated my spirit sight, and I was able to see the bond between us. I don't know how long it's been there, but there it is! We've only just met, really, and now the two of us are in a closer joining than some marriages. Crystal just nodded, still trying to absorb the full impact. So, what do we do now? Well, we stay together, that's for sure. One thing I wonder, has anyone else guessed at the true nature of our bonding or seen it before we did? That sensation I felt during and after the dance at the feasting. Could we have been bonded even then? It's just possible. I must tell ye that I thought I had some kind of feeling about that day, as if something were about to happen. So much else did happen that I dismissed the notion, though. There's another thing, though. Thee managed to facilitate my spirit sight like no one else has, though I suppose that only stands to reason. After all, thee only had to manipulate the threads running between us. And speaking of those threads, perhaps we'd better not try that particular trick again, at least not without a better understanding of what we're doing. My, the hour is advancing. Busy day tomorrow. Best get some sleep. I don't really know how this bond thing works, and I'd like to find out more about it. It seems to me, though, that it facilitates the two of us as a couple, synchronizing and overlapping our thoughts and feelings for each other, and possibly more as well. Most likely. My previous master gave the subject of such bonds only the sketchiest treatment, but he did hint at such things. He yawned. Crystal made a decision. I feel so comfortable next to you. I don't want to leave your side. The filaments between us are not stretched as tightly when we're close together. May I stay with you? Crystal, I thought they'd never ask. I'll just change into my pajamas. I don't think I'm ready for skin yet. All right, for now. No need to complicate things any further this very second. We need to get comfortable being bonded. Let the bond stabilize and strengthen before we try to push things to greater heights. I may have to eat some of the words I said earlier, but a good bit of it I still stand by. Crystal rose, giving his hand a quick squeeze to communicate her unspoken feelings, then went to undress. She donned a soft and comfortable flannel nightgown, and returned to Lance's bedroom. He had put on a pair of patterned silk pajama pants, and was just tying its waistcord. Together they surveyed the small bed. Trust me, it'll work. 'Tisn't larger than my last bed. Just remember, couples don't take up as much space as two people in two beds. You lie there and I'll lie here." They settled down, snuggled close, and sleep overtook them. Awakening to the sunshine as she had the day before, she was disoriented even worse than she had been yesterday. And, like yesterday, she went through waves of memories until it all came back to her. Never a dull moment on this planet. Here was Lance laying beside her, gently snoring. Implications of just how much he was hers as she was his began to parade through her half-awake brain. A bell rang. Was it the first bell? Evidently so, for Lance stirred. "Good morning, Blue Eyes," he said, turning to face her. Thea has wonderful blue eyes, and to see them at first wakening starts my day just right. Sleep well? Like a log. We both must have used a tremendous amount of energy last night. Good morning, my handsome man. Uttering the words just made her tremendously happy, perhaps to even greater heights of joy than before. She embraced him warmly, gave him a quick kiss, and arose to get ready for the day. Head over heels in love? She had heard the expression before, but even it seemed to pale in comparison to what she felt. She felt so affected by it. She wasn't sure if she could think at all about anything else. She tried for a moment to get her feet back on the ground. Busy day today. Lectures, practical exercises. Somewhat stabilized and hearing the ringing of the breakfast bell, she joined Lance in proceeding to the meal. She walked close to him, clinging to him as if the bond between them were fragile and might snap. She drew a little on the spirit energies, and suddenly her head cleared, and she was able to see and think properly. Looking around her, as with new eyes, she noticed many things that had only been blurs the day before. Sitting at the table, she ate what she could, but she was too choked up to manage more than a little bit. After breakfast, they went to the class court. Lance showed her where her lecture was before parting to go to his. She was loath to leave his side, but eventually she was able to pull away. She entered the classroom and took a seat. She looked around at a group of unfamiliar faces and set down on the table a small satchel she had decided would do for a book bag. She extracted her computer. It had been a going-away present from her parents when they placed her in school, her first computer, and it had stood by her through all her classwork and personal use. She tended to regard it as an old friend, which is perhaps why she'd forgotten for the moment some of the planet's strange mentalities. She found herself the center of attention. Little whispers were being exchanged behind her back. "Look, she's got a computer," and the like. The class's attention was diverted as the master entered the chamber. Silence ensued as the lecture began. This class was on about history and geography, and the master began to draw a crude map on the slate, lecturing as he did so. But even this failed to distract some of the students for long. The whispers resumed. Annoyed, the master paused in his lecture and drawing and turned to face the room. Crystal had been diligently entering her notes and capturing images of the slate when the view was not merely of the master's back. The master looked at her as if seeing her in the room for the first time and, catching her eye, nodded before addressing the class. "I suppose I should have introduced the new student to you earlier. This is Crystal. She has only recently arrived on our planet and is not well versed in our ways. Furthermore, her off-planet ways are to be tolerated as long as she chooses to be enrolled here. I realize that intolerance of technology is practically bred into the inhabitants of this planet. However, I must remind you that the official policy of this university includes acceptance of technology along with magical talents." The master turned and resumed his discourse. The whispers did not recur, and the lecture proceeded uninterrupted. After the class, Lance met her in the courtyard and directed her to her next class. The scene over her computer was reenacted with little alteration during the next class, which happened to be grammar and literature. Crystal found this class especially interesting because it featured discussion as well as discourse, and gave her a chance to practice the local idiom as well as to make note of its quaint structures. Here she used her computer to capture samples of speech for later analysis. After this class followed lunch, and following lunch Lance had another class right away while she didn't. Going back up to their room, she heard someone playing a small stringed instrument and singing softly. The sound emanated from the suite at the end of the hall where Lace had indicated she roomed. Dropping off her bag, she proceeded down to the end of the passage where the door was open. She knocked lightly on the door frame and stepped into the room. Lace looked up. "Crystal!" she cried. "Glad thee could stop by. Have a seat and make thyself at home. I trust thy bathing proceeded smoothly last night?" Crystal smiled. "Indeed. Does thee by any chance have some spare time just now?" Lace smiled. "My next class is not for another hour. The same with thee. Do stay and talk. My man is at class this hour." "Mine too. Is this coincidence, or does Helen really plan everyone's life like this? The registrar is truly an amazing person. At one time she taught the empathy class, but now she be retired from teaching and gladly continues to serve the college. Serve it she does. I suspect this be but the first of many afternoon chats, and thee be willing." "Definitely willing. I'm just glad to have another to talk to besides Lance. Girls have to have other girls to talk to, and the time in which to talk." Lace giggled. "Well, we can talk about our men without embarrassing them, and everything else besides. There's a thing or two about Lance that thee really ought to know," she said with a devilish gleam in her eye. Crystal's next class was the one she shared with Lance, Mistress Merriweather's lecture period. She and Lance sat together, and, as in the other classes, Crystal drew out her computer. "Let me guess, thee's been using this thing for thy classes all day. I can just guess at the reactions thee's been getting." "Yes, well, I just brought it along without thinking. It's like an old friend. I've been using it in school and elsewhere ever since my parents sent me away to school. It was their going-away gift. The students teased me about it and whispered behind my back, but the masters were very supportive." "As well they should be. It's against university policy to discriminate on the basis of the technological versus magical tools a person may use." "Well, maybe not so much on the main campus, but here in the college, most definitely so. Counterintuitive, perhaps, but there are more open minds over here." Oddly enough, perhaps because of Lance's presence, or perhaps because of the way news and rumors traveled quickly at the college, no special notice was taken of her computer. Mistress Merriweather was obviously continuing a course already in progress, as she began to draw a diagram on the slate representing a complex spell. However, she assured the newcomers that the individual exercise sections would be geared towards specific ability levels. She spent most of the period in a step-by-step of detailing how to build the spell up out of individual spirit wind filaments. Crystal actually followed the discourse rather well, owing to her, albeit newfound abilities, in visualizing and manipulating the filaments. At the end of the lecture, the mistress posted the assignments to the exercise sections. As Lance had predicted, they were assigned to separate sections. Classes were over for the day, and both Lance and Crystal had lists of suggested reading material. They went to the library to see about borrowing the books. This was the first educational setting that Crystal had encountered that did not provide electronic editions of textbooks, or even personal hard copies, so she was rather dismayed to learn that there were only a limited number of copies of the book. Some of the items on her list she would have to wait in order to take a turn with the copy later, or else purchase a copy. Borrowed books were expected to be returned within a matter of days. The library was a work of art itself. The ceiling was fully double the height of most rooms, and the stacks went from floor to ceiling around the perimeter. A system of spiral staircases and galleries, mere glorified catwalks, provided access to the books. Shorter stacks divided up the middle of the room. She was further dismayed to realize that there were no catalog system, or at least not available to the students, but the books themselves were well organized. Lance helped her find what she needed, or at least what was available at the time. Then they went back to their rooms to prepare for dinner. In the passage, someone was posting a notice on a small board, a girl that Crystal had not seen before. She looked up and smiled as Lance and Crystal approached. "Hello, Lance and Crystal?" she greeted them. Crystal smiled and nodded. "It occurred to me that amidst all the confusion of new classes and masters that there had been some room changes as well, so I would have to convene the Hall Council of 3rd North to make sure that everyone is acquainted. This Friday, a half hour after dinner. Pleased to meet thee, Crystal. By the way, my name's Carol. We'll be meeting in my suite since I seem to be the senior student now." She paused and grinned. "And I've got the largest suite," she finished. Lance and Crystal went on to their suite. Crystal collapsed on the sofa while Lance shut the door, then joined her. "Well, what does thee think of our fine college now, Crystal?" he asked. "Well, I find it quaint in a lot of ways, charming in others, but no different where it counts. They expect a lot, encourage a lot, and tolerate failure as long as you're trying. So they'll get along then. Good. I was afraid thee'd totally be out of thy element out here. I gather that thee is not swayed by the herd in matters concerning thy computer?" She smiled, a little ruefully. "Certainly not. I will use my computer as long as I have charged power packs to operate it. It doesn't use that much power. I can probably use it for 6 months or more if I'm careful. Maybe by then I can get some of the packs recharged." These making some students jealous, thee knows. Still, I don't think that with all these forced into here, that familiar study techniques should be denied thee. Thee just might be taxing the limits of the tolerance policy, that's all. The dinner bell interrupted the conversation at this point. Arriving in the dining hall, Crystal discovered that she was to be the center of attention again for the evening meal. Lance and Crystal were met at the door by none other than Mistress Amber herself, who steered them to the head table. Amber took to the lectern to give the evening's talk. Her discourse started out with the general talk of current events and the starry state of affairs in the South, and then she summoned Crystal to stand beside her. "And now I would like ye to meet an important new student who has joined the college very recently. This is Crystal. She may not be our last best hope, but she is certainly a current great hope. I have evaluated her admittedly raw skills and discovered that she shows great potential, even by my standards." Amber smiled, and a few stifled chuckles sounded about the room. "I had been going to train her privately, fearing her off-planet ways might hinder her training here, but the Dean's Circle has convinced me that the setting of the college and university would be better in other ways." Amber dismissed Crystal with a gesture, then continued, "As a consequence, I wish you all not to disparage her ways, but to tolerate them. She will, in time, grow used to our ways, and who knows but that you might learn something from her." Amber relinquished the lectern, and another speaker took her place, launching into a more ordinary discourse. That Friday, she and Lance went to the hall council meeting in Carol's suite. As soon as all of the hall residents were assembled, Carol closed and bolted the door, then turned to address the group. "I will begin by repeating, especially for the benefit of newcomers, the purpose of the hall councils. Each residence hall, being one wing, passage, etc., will have a council composed of the residents of that hall. The purpose of the council is generally more social than anything else, but occasionally we do have business, such as disciplinary measures. Residents of Third North needn't worry too greatly, as this particular hall has rather relaxed standards for itself. But this is our right, as long as we don't infringe on university policy." Carol paused. "Now let us introduce everyone. I guess the most important addition to this hall is Crystal, who recently arrived from space. All sorts of rumors are flying around about her, including that she's the first girl that Lance hasn't got completely figured out in under a minute." Lance got a startled look on his face, but Crystal just smiled, a bit too sweetly perhaps. Chuckles were heard about the room. Carol continued, "I, being the longest resident in this hall, am now the senior resident. Lance is newly moved from Second East. Lace has been here for half a semester along with her mate, Bruce." Crystal looked over to where Lace sat, more or less enveloped by a large muscular guy. "Finally, my sweet mate over there is Amanda," Carol finished. "Now, having concluded the introductions, and with no business to transact at this meeting, we can go right to the social activities. Who cares to entertain first?" Lace nodded, and, extricating herself from Bruce's embrace, reached behind her for the stringed musical instrument that she had been playing earlier. She played a quiet instrumental piece, and then sang softly to her own accompaniment. In the meantime, cups of wine were passed around, along with light refreshment. Quiet conversations ensued. People rotated around, pairing off to converse with the others one at a time. Crystal answered many questions and got many a tale in return. Eventually, Lace quit playing, and someone else got up to tell some sort of humorous story. The group loosened up as the wine flowed, but mellowed out instead of getting rowdy. Crystal, who had never drank a lot inasmuch as her parents discouraged it, found the light, sweet white wine easy to drink, and as a consequence consumed rather much of it. The party continued, with persons taking turns telling tales, some true, some not, and others speculating as to which was the case. Crystal found herself relating one or two rather embarrassing episodes, which the others found rather amusing, then sat on the sofa, somehow having managed to get wedged between Bruce and Lace. Lance was in the corner having a conversation with Carol and Amanda, punctuated periodically with giggles and guffaws, while Bruce was relating a past episode of mischief that he had been involved in, while Lace looked alternately amused and embarrassed. Crystal must have dozed off, for she woke just as the party was breaking up. She stood up, noticing that the room seemed to be swimming. She reached out for something to steady her and bumped into Lace. The two of them clutched at each other to avoid falling, winding up in sort of an awkward embrace. Reaching out with her mind instead, Crystal tapped a little power from a spirit filament, and suddenly she was awake and alert again. She disengaged herself from Lace and stood apart, with not even a hint of unsteadiness. She went over to Lance and helped him to his feet. He seemed fairly steady, despite having helped himself to the bottle rather frequently, but his speech was slurred. Crystal wished the others good night, on Lance's behalf as well as hers, and for once she led him back to their room. Crystal got Lance into bed, where he lay sprawled, taking up most of it, so she went back to her own bedroom, leaving both bedroom doors ajar. In the morning she woke rather on the late side, but was all quiet. No students were at large in the courtyard, and no steps were being heard in the passage. She looked in on Lance, who was still intently sawing logs. Judging by the sun, it seemed rather late, and no bells had rung yet. She went to her desk in the sitting room and looked at some of the books she would have only a few days to read carefully. Finally, a bell did ring, and she could hear Lance rousing. In a moment he emerged, looking rather bedraggled and not perky as on the past mornings. She went to wish him good morning with an embrace, a kiss, and a question. Why is it so quiet today? And why is the first bell ringing so late? Lance couldn't help looking a little superior. Today is market day, that's why. No class is scheduled today. For that matter, day after market generally doesn't have classes, or, at the most, one. Market days, everything stops at the university. No businesses, no classes. Students have a chance to go into town or on personal outings. I see. Well, I did promise Lace that I'd go to town with her next market day. She didn't make it clear that it was tomorrow, yesterday when she said it. Well, the two of you can go enjoy yourselves. She probably knows where the sort of stores thee might be looking for are, and how to get the best prices. I haven't lived on the same hall with her before, but I've seen her on campus often enough. She can be very shrewd. Well, we got to talking Monday while you were at class, and I mentioned how skimpy a wardrobe I had, and she said that we really must go see about augmenting it. On her advice, I drew an advance on my stipend so I would have some money to cover my purchases. She indicated her belt pouch, which bulged and faintly clinked as it hadn't before. So, first bell rings late on market days, It still indicates a half hour to breakfast, right? Lance nodded. Now I've got a question for thee. Thee looks thy sweet self this morning while I'm hung over. Does thee not get hangovers, or what? I mean, thee seemed to help thyself to the wineskin nearly as much as I did, and certainly seemed to be having a right good time even passed out. I wouldn't know that much about hangovers and such. This is my first exposure to this much alcohol. My parents don't drink much beyond half a glass, and then only when meeting with other traders. They say it's a necessary part of doing business, but they maintain strict limits. I have been allowed small amounts on such occasions, but never enough to get drunk. I enjoyed last night immensely, but when it came time to leave, I seemed to be having trouble standing. Lance said nothing, but his eyes were laughing at this. Now, I don't know how to put this. Lately, I've discovered that if I'm tired or unsteady, I can draw on the power of the spirit winds to recharge, so to speak. Last night at the party, after bumping into Lace accidentally, I drew on the power and immediately felt as steady as I had been before the party. Lance's eyes widened in amazement. That's incredible. Thee can heal thyself, and thy training is barely started. He shook his head incredulous. Well, remind me never to try drinking thee under the table. Seriously, though, I've known lots of healers who could heal others just fine, but to heal themselves just seemed impossible. It doesn't seem unethical or immoral. Maybe they just don't realize they can, Crystal put in. I didn't really think I was healing myself, just steadying myself. Still, it doesn't seem right to be using it to make up for lost sleep, unless there's a critical need for my own full faculties. As far as curing hangovers, though, I wouldn't know. I've never had one. Being drunk is rather pleasant, though. I wonder if it's possible to only partially cure the drunkenness. Crystal had a wicked gleam in her eye. A conniving vixen they is. Just make sure others don't know this little secret of yours, and yes, I'm keeping very mum about what thee can do until thee can have a proper evaluation of thy magical abilities. Not that I've ever told a tale or two now, mind thee. Well, breakfast bell will be ringing soon, but my head is ringing already. If thee doesn't mind, I'd like to go put it under some cold water. He gathered up some toiletries and stepped out. Thank you for joining today's episode of Read with Rave. I apologize for my stumbling, but I'm working on reading better, so I appreciate your patience. If you liked, please comment down below if you want me to do more of these. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and don't forget to splash the bell icon so you never miss another video, and I will catch you all on the next wave. Bye!